Yo guys, in this video, short-term rental and Airbnb taxation in Mexico. This is a topic that's incredibly important for anyone considering short-term rentals or Airbnb in Mexico. Taxation, right? Whether you're an expat, digital nomad, or even a local looking to generate income, understanding the tax implications of short-term rental properties in Mexico is crucial because it's going to be a huge part of your profit, of your numbers. So you got to make sure you know your numbers before you get into this business. So let's break down what you need to know about taxes on your Airbnb or other short-term rental properties in Mexico. Okay. So before we jump into the numbers and the tax details, and by the way, this is going to be a very comprehensive video, let's start with the legal requirements. If you're renting out property on Airbnb or any other short-term rental platform in Mexico, you're required by law to pay taxes. This applies whether you're a resident of Mexico or not. Both individuals and businesses must comply with tax laws, so it's essential to understand the rules to avoid penalties down the line. The Mexican government has been cracking down on tax compliance in the short-term rental market. Platforms like Airbnb are actually now required to automatically withhold taxes from hosts in most situations. But more on that in a minute. You know, I know as a digital nomad expat traveler, you probably see international real estate all the time and you say, wow, this would make a good Airbnb, right? So, and maybe you're even thinking, hey, I want to buy a property in Mexico. Maybe I live in it in the winter, rent it out in the summer. Lots of ways to do it. I think most expats who are interested in buying property in Mexico are also interested in the rules about short-term rentals. I'm in the same boat. I'm very interested in this as well. So this is coming from a place of, yeah, I want to know what this is because I see deals in Mexico and I want to see how I can do the Airbnb stuff. So that's where my intellectual curiosity comes from. And the taxation is a big part of it because, you know, you can wrap your head around how much it costs to clean a place, or maybe a property manager is, 10-15%, and property taxes are super low. So really the biggest variable in terms of profitability, other than, filling up the calendar, is the taxes. So let's get into it now, okay? So how taxes work for short-term rentals in Mexico. There are two key types of taxes you need to be aware of. One is income tax, also known as ISR, Impuesto sobre la Renta. Okay? This is based on the income that you generate from renting out your property. Whether you're a Mexican resident or a foreigner, this tax applies to your earnings. Income tax rates in Mexico are progressive, ranging from 1.92% to 35%, depending on your total income. Next, the other tax that's key is value-added tax, also called IVA, Impuesto al Valor Agregado. The IVA is the sales tax, and it's currently 16% in most parts of Mexico. This tax is applied to the total rent amount charged to your guests. As a host, you're responsible for collecting this tax and paying it to the Mexican tax authorities. Although maybe Airbnb holds it, they've gone back and forth a bit. Okay, but there is going to be IVA, there's going to be sales tax, either way. And then in some states, there's also lodging tax, okay? Particularly in Quintana Roo, where Cancun, Tulum, and Playa del Carmen are located, right? So there's a lodging tax of an additional 3 to 4%. This tax is applied on top of the rental income and is usually passed on to the guest, but you as the host are responsible for making sure it's paid to the local authorities. Now let's talk a bit about Airbnb's role in tax withholding. I might get this slightly wrong, by the way, so do your own research, but here's what my research has led me to. So if you're renting through platforms like Airbnb, there's some good news. Airbnb automatically withholds income tax and value-added tax, IVA, on behalf of hosts in Mexico. You could say that's a good thing, you say it's a bad thing. Makes it easier at least. So for income tax, the ISR, Airbnb generally withholds between 4 and 10%, depending on whether you're a resident or non-resident of Mexico. And then for the value-added tax, the IVA, Airbnb withholds the standard 16% and submits it directly to the Mexican tax authorities. If Airbnb is handling this, it can simplify things, but it's still important to understand what's being withheld and make sure it's correct. So the IVA, that's kind of taken care of automatically by Airbnb. The income tax differs, right? Depends if you're a resident or non-resident, or maybe you're a citizen. Maybe you're like a Mexican citizen, but you live in the US. So I know there's like a whole number of different variables there. Just something to keep in mind. Airbnb might withhold income tax. They might not. So what if you're a non-resident of Mexico? Okay. Do you still have to pay taxes on income generated from Airbnb or short-term rentals in Mexico? The short answer is yes. Even if you're not a Mexican resident, you're still required to pay taxes on the income earned from renting out property in Mexico. Here's how it works. Income tax for non-residents. If you're a non-resident, Airbnb generally withholds 20% income tax, the ISR, on your earnings. This is a flat rate for non-residents, so it doesn't follow the progressive tax rates that residents are subject to, which kind of makes sense, because how could it be progressive if they don't actually know, how much you earn because you're a non-resident? The income tax is withheld automatically, which means Airbnb will deduct the 20% from your earnings and remit it to the Mexican tax authorities. And then regarding value-added tax, the IVA, the 16% IVA still applies whether you're a resident or non-resident, which makes sense. Airbnb will also withhold and remit that tax on your behalf. While this simplifies the process of tax withholding, keep in mind that as a non-resident, you're still legally required to register with the SAT, which is the Mexican Tax Authority, and you also need to file an annual tax return to report your rental income and ensure all taxes are correctly paid. Okay, and they'll probably have deductions as well. We'll get to that also a bit later in the video. So non-residents, 20% income tax on the income from Airbnb. Okay, and I think that would apply to, like, if you have Mexican residency but you're a non-tax resident. But let's get into that in a bit more detail. So what if you're a Mexican resident but not a tax resident? So what if you're living in Mexico and you're a resident, you're a legal resident, but not a tax resident? The situation can be a bit more complex. And by the way, we have videos, other videos on the channel about Mexico legal residency versus tax residency, so you can check that out. We have other videos about permanent residency versus temporary residency. You can check that out. We have videos about the path to citizenship and naturalization in Mexico. Go check it out. So we got a lot of videos on these Mexico themes. So guys, check out our channel. Be sure to subscribe. A lot of information on the channel as well as the podcast. Okay, so let's keep going. So let's say you're a Mexican resident but not a tax resident, which most of my clients with Mexican residency, they would fall into that category. So in Mexico, your tax residency depends on where your center of vital interest lies, meaning where you earn the most of your income and where your main economic activities occur. If you're spending time in Mexico, but mostly earning your income abroad, you might be a resident of Mexico without being considered a tax resident. So how would that situation impact your short-term rental income? So if you're a Mexican legal resident but not a tax resident, you'll still be liable for income tax on the money that you make from short-term rentals in Mexico. However, the amount that you owe may differ. If you're considered a non-tax resident, Airbnb may withhold the 20% flat income tax that applies to non-residents, rather than the progressive tax rates for residents. That makes sense to me. Then there's the value-added tax, still going to be 16%. Okay, So even as a non-tax resident, it's crucial to register with the SAT and ensure that your taxes are being paid correctly to avoid penalties down the line. So this is pretty rough, for every $1,000 you earn from Airbnb, you're giving $200 to the Mexican government. Okay. So that's why it's so important to do this research, because it'll completely change your numbers about whether a particular rental property is in fact profitable. Okay. Now let's talk about registering with Mexican tax authorities, called the SAT. Okay, so even if Airbnb is withholding taxes, you are still required to register with the Mexican Tax Administration Service, the SAT. Okay, it probably stands for Servicio Administrativo de Tax. I don't know. So that's SAT. If you're earning income from the rentals in Mexico, you have to register, required. And this involves getting an RFC, RFC, which is a Registro Federal de Contribuyentes number. This is your tax ID in Mexico, and it's necessary to have this to comply with tax regulations. You'll also need to file an annual tax return. Even though Airbnb withholds some taxes, you still need to report your rental income to ensure you're paying the correct amount of taxes based on your total income. Then you're also going to have to issue electronic invoices called facturas for your rentals if requested by guests. This is another legal requirement in Mexico and part of the formalization process of your rental business. So you have to be able to issue facturas, and that's why it might be good to have a Mexican accountant. And then on the flip side, I actually didn't know this until I started researching for this video, but you can request facturas from your Airbnb hosts. I guess technically Airbnb already does it for you, so you kind of don't even really need it. But something to keep in mind, that you could actually technically ask for a factura. I don't know how that would be helpful because you already kind of get a receipt from Airbnb, but I don't know, something to keep in mind, something I'm going to keep my eye on in the future. Now, let's talk about potential tax deductions. Let's reduce the pain here, because that 20% income tax is painful. So let's kind of reduce that. So one positive aspect of paying taxes in Mexico is that you can deduct certain expenses to lower your taxable income. For example, maintenance and repair costs for the rental property, utility bills, if they're paid by you as the host, such as electricity, water, internet, as well as property management fees, if you hire a company to manage your rental. So make sure to keep all the receipts and issue proper invoices or facturas for these expenses so they can be deducted when you file your taxes. So I could kind of see a world where, let's say you owe, use our $1,000 example, you owe $200 to the Mexican government. Well, maybe you could sort of arrange some sort of property management fee that ends up costing around $200. So basically you don't owe anything. That could kind of work, right? Just an idea. Now let's move on to penalties for non-compliance. So let's talk about what happens if you don't comply with Mexico's tax regulations. Failure to comply with the tax obligations can result in serious consequences, including fines. So the SAT can impose hefty fines on those who fail to register or pay taxes. Also, you could have the suspension of your Airbnb account. So platforms like Airbnb are increasingly working with local governments to ensure compliance. If you're not paying taxes properly, you could face account suspensions or legal action. And then also back taxes and interest, right? If you're audited and found to owe taxes, you may be liable for the back taxes along with interest and penalties. It's important to play by the rules to avoid these fines. So definitely something to keep in mind, right? Got to register. And that's it. That's your guide to short-term rental and Airbnb taxation in Mexico. Whether you're a resident, a non-resident, or all the different combinations, understanding your tax obligations is key to managing your rental property successfully and avoiding any unpleasant surprises. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, notification bell, And also leave a comment. Like if you have experience with short-term rentals in Mexico, I would love to hear your experience. I'd love to hear horror stories. I'd love to hear good stories as well. And be sure to follow the channel My Latin Life for content on living, investing, and living, investing in Mexico and really all over Latin America. And by the way, if you want residency in Mexico, if you want to become a resident, we do that. We're an international immigration firm. We've helped dozens and dozens of people from all different countries, Canada, the US, Europe, get residency in Mexico, and we can help you too. There will be a link in the description where you can book a video, become our client, and we can get you Mexican residency or any other service that you need, whether it's residency, bank accounts, whatever, all over Latin America. We can help. Cool. Catch you in the next video.